Mulcharmy Meowls belongs in the main deck. And like many of the Mulcharmy, of course, it's going to depend on the format. In the current format, it seems to make a lot of sense. Don't worry, I got a chart cover for you guys to kind of give you the coverage of why this Mulcharmy is so good. And hey guys, by the way, this is Tombox, and today I'm going to give you guys my thought process and comparison of why this particular Mulcharmy Meowls, is main deck worthy. And maybe by the end of this, you can actually repeat this thought process when you start to develop what you want to put into your hand trap line in your deck. Before we jump in, if you guys want to see more videos like this and bringing back the classic discussion, break down the cards thought process, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and ding that notification bell. And without further ado, let's go. All right, a quick summary on the Mulcharmy family and their timing. So we have Purulia, Furolos, and Meowls. Going first, going second, and ultimately we actually have to talk about what if you draw this card on 6? Because that's another timing that you can use, because we have to make sure that we have no cards in our hand to activate these cards. Going first, it's not going to feel very good unless there's Tearlaments, all right? That's just a fact, because Tearlaments is probably the only deck that gets affected by all of these cards if you go first, because they're going to share your turn and they're going to do a lot of special summonings and even have access to the extra deck. But outside of that, it's only Purulia that has any sort of like recovery advantage, where you can get hit by a Bestial, a Phantasme, Nibiru. Those are the only cards you're really going to draw off of. It's just hand traps or they're playing Tearlaments. You guys kind of get the idea. The most advantage is for Purulia when you're going first with the card and you want to throw the card away. Outside of that, I don't think it's really worth it, and some people have to contemplate whether skipping their turn because they open multiple Mulcharmies, okay? So, what about going second? The ideal timing. Of course, Purulia, you always get that normal summon, and you always get that search heavy deck that has the additional action to special summon from hand. Then those are the decks that are going to lead to you getting one draw at least from the normal summon, and every deck is going to offer that. So this essentially is an upstart goblin, and then for every additional action it turns into a pot of greed, you know, card of demise. You guys kind of get the idea of how far this thing can push depending on the matchup. And a lot of the going second part is going to be matchup dependent, which is why most of these cards are basically sided, right? Furolos, you're never going to put that when you're going in first. Maybe keep it for a crossout copy, but you see that, hey, they're going to be a combo heavy deck, and these are the most common types of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! 1 to 5 draws, not uncommon at all. Most people try to keep it below 3 so that it's not getting out of control where people get to dig their outs, especially post-side. But what about Meowls in terms of going second? Of course, again, it depends on the matchup, but in our current format, there are multiple decks that are capable of summoning out of the graveyard. I believe, based on what I've seen so far, this card probably will get you one draw at the very least if you main deck it, so essentially back to the upstart thing, but it offers you something a little bit more, because there's always going to be graveyard recurrence from your opponent, and based on that, you can sometimes even hold on to it if you drew into it with a different like Mulcharmy, and probably use it back on your own turn when it's the 6th card. 6th card, you have Nibiru for the Purulia, you have the Bestials. Essentially, Purulia is one of the worst when it comes to drawing as your 6th card. Furolos, there's IP Masquerena and Centurion cards. These are okay. I mean, these are sometimes one of the guarantee things that do come up, and so you're going to get yourself a draw, turning this essentially into an upstart to some degree. But for Meowls, on the other hand, most decks have built-in cycling capability as disruption, and that's their response when they start summoning stuff back from the graveyard. Imagine if we had this during the Snake Eye format. You would be able to draw for the Flamberge, you would be able to draw for the Promethean Princess, the Promethean Princess summoned from Grave effect. You just have so much more access to getting the most out of this card, which is why even if you drew it later on, it doesn't even feel that bad, because most decks have ways to retaliate in the graveyard. So the 5 matchups I want to include in this particular kind of discussion and breakdown would be Fiend Smith, of course, Kashtira, Riseo, Malice, and we're also going to be inclusive of Mitsurugi, as it has a lot of hype behind it, and I believe it is going to be a very, very strong deck. Here we go. Let's start off with Kashtira. So Kashtira against going first, if you have this card and you're playing against Kashtira, is pretty much useless. They have no real summons against you. It's not like they're going to play like Tearlaments, Kashtira, banish your own card, summon a dude. It's not likely going to happen because they like to keep their boards empty. So across the board, that's not going to happen. What about going second? Purulia is the one that maintains most of the advantage. Most of the Mulcharmies aren't very strong against them, but these cards need to be able to gain at least one card to recover itself, so it can at least act as an upstart. But if you're playing Purulia, then you got the best chances of getting probably 2 draws. They get the one from the initial special summon, and then the additional normal summon from Birth. So that's 2 cards, and Fenrir gets that search, so they have to contemplate whether they want to go into it. As for Furolos, if this was like the old Kashtira, then I would say, yeah, you're drawing a ton of cards. Unless they're playing combo Kashtira, then then the Furalos is definitely going to generate a lot more cards. But ultimately, it's just mainly Cashier Theosis that's going to give you that draw and nothing else. If they're playing more of a stun variant that's just there to put out the big Cashier bodies, then that's all you're really going to see when you're going second, and it's not very good. And there's not exactly a whole lot of pure Cashier builds, but it offers you at least one card just from the Cashier side. As for Meowls, you're going to get Cashier Birth. Not bad. I mean, still one card going second. As for the 6th card, Perulia feels absolutely terrible. Furalos, probably not going to happen unless they go into Shangri-Era, which a lot of players do not. I mean, some people choose to because they have the field spell up and they can use it as a way to destroy a card. Outside of that, not really that big of a deal, and they don't really do that many summons on your turn afterwards anyways. And for the final one, it's Meowls. Meowls offer you basically nothing unless they're playing Preparation, and a lot of decks are not playing it, so I'm just not going to include it in this chart. But there are more cards technically on here, it's just that they're not commonly played. Now let's look at the opposite. Let's look at Fiend Smith. Going first, they do nothing, okay? None of the Mulcharmies do anything, especially if you have it going first and you're playing against Fiend Smith. What are they going to do? Summon a guy on your turn? Not likely going to happen. Perulia is probably the weakest one when it comes to playing against Fiend Smith, as the Lacrima is likely the only normal summon, or maybe it's like one of... If they're playing pure, they might go for like the Magical Musketeers. But outside of that, Alluri maybe, you're gonna get one draw from Perulia. But Furalos and Meowls going second, wild. You know, they have the Moon of the Closed Heaven, they have Requiem, Agnum Day Sequence, just the summoning additional effect from Sequence, Desiree. It leads to a lot of draws, and most people do not go down that line. They probably just want to set up their Lacrima and their Requiem so that they have some level of disruption from the Desiree being sent to the grave from Phoenix's Paradise. That's about it. And for Meowls, if they want to engage, well, yeah, you're not really going to get all too much from it. Maybe 1 to 2 cards. At least it will upstart you to some degree and potentially pot of greed you, depending on how far it goes. If they start with Engraver or they play Track into Luri, then you're going to get the draw from the Luri. And the Engraver summoning itself back from the graveyard is also another one. Now, if they get Meowls, they're very unlikely going to push into Agnum Day, because if they do that, that's a 3rd card for you to draw, and that's pretty wild, because they're trying to attempt to revive their copy of Desiree. All right, not looking too hot. What about 6th card here? So 6th card, Perulia, obviously no good, but you have the Furalos. Furalos can still work on the Requiem that's likely going to get summoned back, okay? And if they go for the the Lacrima effect, summon out Requiem tag out, summon back Lacrima, then you're going to be able to draw for that Requiem, so that's still turning it into at least a draw 1. Whereas Meowls, there's 2 options here. If they go for Lacrima effect, that's already going to be 1 draw for the summoning back of the Link monster, and then if they choose to revive an Agnum Day to revive Desiree, then that's a 2-part draw, turning your Meowls into a pot of greed. So as your opponent is disrupting, you breaking their board, you're recovering cards as they try. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. Yeah, there are options here. Sure, it's 2 cards, but 2 cards is still equivalent to a pot of greed. Next, let's look at Riseo. Going first, they do nothing. None of the Riseo cards can summon themselves from the hand, so nothing to worry about there. They don't really do any sort of hand-based summon disruption, aside from maybe like Bestial cards. Well, we already talked about Bestial, so ultimately, you don't put it in because they have like hand traps. But Perulia is the stronger card of the Mulcharmy family, because the normal summon and each of them can special summon themselves from hand. Again, this is one of those added to hand, then summon to field. This is kind of like ABCs. They add to hand and then they summon onto field. That's what they do. That's what they do best. So each of them will essentially offer you a draw if they push that far. Most people just jump straight into Detonator, leading you to getting mainly just 2 draws, because they still need to put 2 cards onto the field to make the Detonator. Whereas Furalos, if they engage, if they play Fiend Smith, you also have the Exciter Knight to get you the additional draw. Ice Riseo summoning from the deck, giving you that additional draw. There's a lot that this deck has to offer when it comes to drawing, because they can keep on playing. And if they go into Dual Drive, that's a draw. And of course, Detonator is a draw. So these are the draws that they offer just from the Furalos. And finally, Meowls. Oh, this is a deck that doesn't summon a lot, right, guys? But remember, Eclipse Twins is also coming out, and if you disrupted their board previously and they want to revive, say, their Detonator and still want to put an Eclipse Twins under it, then they're going to essentially gonna put that card and maybe even send it to the graveyard just to get that revival effect. Okay, so this is one way that they can try to kind of reboost themselves and rebuild a Detonator on board, and you're going to be able to get draws. Other cards that you can draw off of from just the Riseo package, you got Node for sure if they go for the graveyard effect. it's most effective, especially for Meowls, when it comes to disrupting them first, so that they do need to use the graveyard for recovery. And let's not forget, Riseo plugin is another option. And so when it comes to 6 card, Meowls is likely the only one that has any sort of advantage as drawing it on 6 to help you recover. As if they do go into, Eclipse Twins and they play Plug and a more pure variant, or some people just choosing play Plug because they just like to manipulate the numbers for Riseo Cross, then you're going to be able to get yourselves additional draws there. So this could lead to 0 to 2 draws on your own turn if you just shotgun it, and as you break board, as you counter you got rid of Detonator, Eclipse Twins go off, they summon Detonator, you get to draw a card. So whatever that you broke and they recovered, you recovered as well. And that same goes for Plug. And there's Malice. Malice is probably the one that is probably worst off when it comes to eating any of the Mulcharmy family, because they summon from all over the place. However, going first with this deck, the only thing that you can really do if they want to do something against you is that they have Bystials. They main deck Bystials for the reason, and I guess that kind of applies for all the other decks. Going second, you have the Bystials. You have the normal summon of the Dormouse, White Rabbit, or maybe even Chessy Cat. So 1 to 2 cards is the maximum that you're likely going to see from Purulia. Furlos, on the other hand, is essentially a turn skip because they just dig so deep into their extra deck that they just really don't want to give you 8 to 10 cards just from this particular play alone. And you can see from Haggard Lizardoy, Splash Mage, each of the Malice Queens, the Firewall Dragons, Neo Fire Dragon Temperance Herds, Axis Code Talker. That's not very unlikely, but like TB11, it's kind of wild of how many draws you can get. And on top of that, even like if you look at Meowls is going to be able to draw for every single banished Malice pawn that they're gonna summon. It's gonna be Dormouse, White Rabbit, Chessy Cat, that's 3, a Link Decoder summoning itself back from the graveyard, Dotscaper summoning out, there is the GWC as well, and each of the names also Whitebinder, like everything that you see in the Furlos category that's a Malice card also belongs here. You get like so many cards, making it even easier. And of course on 6 card, if you happen to drop early, you can use that to the Bystial, Magnemud, or Druid Swarm. They all work. Against Furlos, Furlos is active because if they have Code of Soul to continue their link play, their TB11s to summon, and don't forget, when it comes to Meowls definitely helps you recover. If you drew out this card on 6 and you just play this against your opponent, their board 9 times out of 10 is pretty empty at the finishing of their combo because everything is going to be summoned to interact with you. When it gets to that point, guess what? GWC gives you a draw. The Red Ransom that gets banished gets a draw. White Binder is going to banish a bunch of stuff. That's probably going to lead to a bunch of draws. And even their Heart's Cryptor, when they perform that summon, when they bring it back, you're going to get some kind of drop, but that's likely going to come from the Code of Soul play more than anything else. But I'm saying there's just a lot of things giving you a ton of draws, and that's just with Meow. So going first or second with Meows, it doesn't really feel that bad just because you're going to have some level of, or not some level, a lot of recovery if this chooses to push. And as for the final matchup, it's the Mitsurugi. Purulia is going to give you the 2-card draw, one from the ritual spell itself and the other from the normal summon of the Mitsurugi monster. So it's kind of still part of the 2-part draw here, according the normal summons part of it. Furlos doesn't actually generate as much advantage unless they are going to dive into linking or Xyz summoning into like King of the Feral Imps, for instance. But ultimately it's going to come from the Mitsurugi ritual, and this particular ritual can summon from the deck as well. That's why it comes for both Purulia and Furlos that can basically react on the Mitsurugi ritual. But Meowls, on the other hand, this is where it gets a little bit more wild, because Mitsurugi Prayers summons back one of those Mitsurugi monsters from the graveyard, which is very, very strong already. And then on top of that, each of those rituals, they're capable of summoning themselves back out from the graveyard, especially when they're tributed, and that will lead to additional draws as well. And those particular effects can be applied during your own turn. So if you drew Meows on 6, then you can, if they chain Prayers, tributing off one of their monsters, you're going to be able to draw. If they activate the trap card, they're going to tribute off one of the rituals and they're going to summon it back. That's going to lead to additional draws. And if they play Prayers itself, it has the summoning back effect anyway. They take 800 damage and then they can summon back one of their Mitsurugi monsters from the graveyard. There's just so much advantage that they can get. But with the Meowls, you can mitigate that advantage and go card for card with them as they try to break your board. Again, you're getting a recovery, and that's what Meowls offers. So I know what you guys are thinking, like, hey Tom, this is really only good against like Malice and maybe Mitsurugi. Like, I don't think it's main deck worthy, especially when there's like Fiend Smith and Riseo. Those are the strongest deck. And if you mentioned that, I'm glad you mentioned it, because you guys clearly are on the right track. Most decks aren't solo decks. Most decks are hybrid. You see the strongest deck being Fiend Smith Riseo right now. That means you can take the two sheets and overlay them on top of each other, and all of a sudden you have a lot more coverage, especially decks that bridge into each other. That means you have access to drawing cards for both pools of cards together. And if you just take it back, combine the sheets, Kashtira plus like Malice, you can kind of see that, hey, there's actually a lot more overlap and a lot more cards to be drawn. And essentially, you just really need to draw like 2 to 3 cards for the Mulcharmy to have done its job. And when they're playing multiple archetypes, this is where you can really thrive. And the Meowls is really the only card that benefits off for you when you draw it as a 6 card, which feels a lot less worse than when it comes to bricking with multiple Purulia, multiple Furulas, and drawing them on 6. That's the argument I'm trying to make. Hopefully you guys can be convinced, but if you guys aren't, leave it down in the comment section of what you guys think about the new Mulcharmy and how you would give it additional application. And in the future, would you try to kind of rechart it out for different matchups? I hope you guys give it a try. But that's all I got for this video, guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, smash that thumbs up button, hit subscribe, and ding that notification bell. Really helps out, and I'll see you all in the next one.